Hey guys, welcome to GED Science Level 4 practice test. So this is the hardest practice test of the four. Um, and so level 1 is the easiest, and we kind of move all the way up through level 4. So if you haven't done this before, in the description is the 20 questions and the answer choices. I recommend doing that first, go through it, and then watch the video and see what the correct answers are, and hopefully get information about some stuff that you don't know, if there is such a thing, and hopefully helps you get more and more ready for the actual GED science test. I try to say this at the beginning of each of these videos, for score, so you know kind of like what you're shooting for. Your score that you want on each of the subject areas, so like science is a subject area, is 145. That's the minimum score to pass. That basically means about 65%, right? And so that would be 13 out of 20. This is the hardest practice test, right? So if you're at like 13, you're probably doing pretty good on some of the other, perhaps the easier questions. If you're thinking about college or other types of post-secondary education, you really want it to be more like 75 or 80% on the test as a whole. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Only other thing, we do have a mobile app which is free to download, and I think has thousands of GED questions. Be very useful to be using that, getting feedback for every one of your answers, and then we'll also have customized short videos for you as you answer, where we figure out where your knowledge gaps are, rather than you having to kind of like sort through and figure out what videos to watch. I think that would be useful as well in most cases. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our test. So question number 1 is on phenotype. So they want to know, what does phenotype refer to? And the phenotype is the physical expression of an organism's genotype. Okay, so phenotype, again, that refers to a trait's physical appearance based on an organism's genetic code, and that genetic code is the genotype. So environmental factors do also play a role, but this answer is the one you want to be familiar with, is knowing phenotype and how genotype fits in to that. That genotype is the genetic expression, or the genetic code, if you prefer. Question 2. Okay, for recessive alleles, which of the following exemplifies a genotype consisting of 2 recessive alleles? And so that's 2 lowercase, like that, right? So if it was 2 dominant alleles, it would be that, right? This is nothing here. And 1 dominant and 1 recessive is answer choice B there, capital T, lowercase t. So recessive alleles of any kind are denoted by lowercase. That's what we want to know there. Q3. A special type of cell division that reduces the number of chromosomes by half. That is going to be our friend meiosis. Okay, and so we want to really be able to differentiate between meiosis and mitosis. I believe we have had a question on this. I believe it was in the level 3 exam. It was a mitosis question. This one is a meiosis question. So you don't really need to know a lot more than this. During mitosis, a cell's chromosomes divide to form 2 identical sets. The cytoplasm also splits, forming 2 equal daughter cells. But meiosis is a type of cell division that reduces the number of chromosomes in the parent cell by half and produces 4 gamete cells. This process is required to produce egg and sperm cells for sexual reproduction. And that is about all we need to know there. Q4 on alleles. What are different forms of a genes associated with a specific characteristic called? So worded a little weird there, but that's what we want our alleles. We want to be familiar with what alleles are. They are different forms of a gene linked to specific characteristics. When two alleles are inherited for a trait, but only one allele is expressed, that allele is called the dominant allele, right? So again, we're having like a repeating concept here, right? So in question 2, we were talking about dominant and recessive alleles. Talking about it again here. The allele that is not expressed, that is recessive. Question 5. The nitrogenous bases in DNA bond together very specifically. Which of the following is an accurate pair, accurate base pair? So that would be adenine and thymine. Answer choice B. So the bases in DNA, they pair the same always in a predictable way. Adenine always matches with thymine. Guanine always bonds with cytosine. According to these rules, the correct choice for this one is adenine and thymine. And yes, you need to memorize those, right? That's a very, very common question. The process of making a protein begins with the presence of an amino acid. Answer choice A. So the process of making proteins is pretty simple. First, you need an amino acid. Another nucleic acid that lives in the cell is transfer RNA. Transfer RNA is bonded to the amino acids floating around the cell. With the messenger RNA offering instructions, the ribosome connects to a transfer RNA and pulls off one amino acid. So the important part as far as this actual question, though, process of making a protein begins with amino acids. Question 7. A DNA molecule with part or all of the genetic material of an organism is a chromosome. Okay, so making sure that we can connect those two together. So a chromosome is a molecule with part or all of the genetic material of an organism. Chromosomes are visible under a microscope only during cell division. All right, what do we got on this one? Question 8. What information is needed so that protein synthesis takes place? And that would be this. The order of nitrogen bases on a gene. So specific sequences of base pairs code for specific amino acids, which in turn build particular proteins. This means that the order of base pairs dictates which proteins will actually be created. Okay, so then we move on to balancing chemical equations. Okay, so which of these can you do? To balance a chemical equation, can you change the coefficients? Can you change the subscripts? Can you do both? Can you not do any of this stuff? And the answer is coefficients. So the coefficients are what go in front of the substance. Like, for example, if we have this. Yeah, that's the coefficient. This can be adjusted and changed. Subscripts, however, cannot be changed for any reactant or product. Okay, type of reactions here. Baking bread, a very common example, is an example of which type of reaction? Endothermic, exothermic, activation, none of the above. Just as a general test taking thing, the none of the above answer is very, very rare, right? So unless you are absolutely positive that it's none of these three, as I would probably never guess at none of the above. So an endothermic reaction is any chemical reaction that absorbs heat from its environment. Baking bread or an egg solidifying, those are common examples of endothermic reactions. An exothermic reaction involves the energy usually being transferred as heat energy, causing the reaction mixture and its surroundings to become hotter. Like a burning candle would be an excellent example of an exothermic reaction. Activation energy is the amount of energy needed to get a reaction going. So starting a fire, that would be a good example of activation energy. Okay, back to balancing equations. When balancing an equation, what must be equal on the left and right side of the equation? Is it elements, molecules, ions, or is it atoms? And what we were doing is atoms. So the number of atoms must be equal on each side of the equation. Okay, and for this one, hopefully you picked answer choice A. A chemical reaction involves the rearranging of atoms of the same or different elements to form new substances. It is represented by a chemical equation in which the reactants, which are substances that are broken apart, are written on the left, and the products, which are new substances that are being formed, are written on the right. If more than one reactant or product is needed, they are separated with a plus sign. An arrow is used to separate the reactant side of the equation from the product side. So in this problem, we have CH4 and O2 as the reactants, while CO2 and H2O are the products. Okay. And then we jump into Sir Isaac Newton. His three laws of motion combined with his law of gravitation explain what? And that would be Kepler's law of planetary motion. All right, so these questions are harder. Remember, this is level 4. Right, and hopefully we have the stuff down on level 1, 2, and 3 before jumping right into level 4. But as we talk here about Kepler's laws and Newton, so Newton showed that the motion of bodies subject to central gravitational force need not always follow elliptical orbits. From Kepler's second law, it can be observed further that angular momentum of any planet about an axis through Sun and perpendicular to the orbital plane is also unchanging. Okay, so this is just an answer you kind of have to memorize. I would do that as opposed to really trying to dive really deep into Kepler's laws. Okay, which of the following signifies how fast an object is moving and in what direction? So that's velocity. So we can talk about that, right? And the differences specifically between velocity and acceleration. Average speed does seem like a good choice, but average speed doesn't take into account direction in which an object is moving. Acceleration is the change of velocity as time elapses. Deceleration is simply a special case of acceleration that causes an object to slow down. So if we have how fast something's going and what direction, that's velocity. Another question similar. Speed is going 55, sorry, a car is going 55 miles per hour. Gave away the answer. This would be characterized as speed. So speed, that's the rate at which an object moves. Velocity, which we just talked about, is speed with direction, right? And so what does that mean is it'll specifically say north, south, east, west, something like that. Acceleration is the rate at which velocity changes. If we were going 55 miles an hour and then increased our speed by 20 feet per second, that would be acceleration. A force, on the other hand, is anything that changes the state of either rest or motion. Gravity and friction are the two most common forces. Pressing on the brakes to slow down, that's a form of friction and force. Okay, and then we go back to Newton. right? So he's going to show up on some of the toughest GED science questions. Newton's laws of motion describe the relationship between a body and the forces acting upon it, and its motion in response to those forces. His first law defines the force qualitatively, and we can talk about that for a second too here. Newton's first law states that an object either remains at rest or continues to move at a constant velocity unless acted upon by a force. So that's the first law. This sets a qualitative but not a quantitative parameter. The second law does involve formulas for force, which you won't be tested on. However, you do need to know the second law states that the rate of change of momentum of a body is directly proportional to the force applied, and this change in momentum takes place in the direction of the applied force. The third law states that there is no such thing as a force that is not accompanied by an equal and opposite force. Okay, so those are his laws. And again, being familiar with this, so it requires more time and energy spent like understanding his concepts and sort of memorizing what each of the laws are. So, but it's only worth one question, most likely. I would be surprised if you got more than one, but I would expect one on Newton's laws. So I would make sure like all of those stuff that's probably takes less time for understanding concepts like in level 3 and level 2 and level 1 is I would make sure I had those down first. Those are more of the low-hanging fruit before I worried about Newton's laws. Which of the following would likely use direct current? Okay, so we need to have some basic knowledge of direct and alternating current. And so this would be a smoke alarm. So direct current is typically really only used for battery operated devices, such as a smoke alarm or perhaps like a remote control for your television. However, most household appliances will be using alternating current. Okay, and some types of energy here towards the end of level 4. What converts mechanical energy into electrical energy? And that is a generator. So generators convert mechanical energy into electrical energy, while a motor does the opposite. It converts electrical energy into mechanical. Both devices work because of electromagnetic induction, which is when a voltage is induced by a changing magnetic field. Question 19. So an object is negatively charged if it has an excess of electrons, right? Remembering that electrons are negative. So an object is negatively charged if it has excess of electrons, but otherwise it's either positively charged or uncharged. Also, we might want to remember that like charges repel, unlike charges attract. And then finally, question 20. Unit for electric potential, that is the volt. The volt is the drive unit for electric potential. 1 volt is defined as the difference in electric potential between 2 points of a conducting wire. The watt, that's a unit of electrical power. The ohm is a unit of electrical resistance. So they might seem similar, but as far as science is concerned, they are different, and so you want to know those differences. Okay, so that gets us to the end of level 4 practice test. If there are things that are either confusing, don't make sense, you'd like further explanation, leave a comment and we will respond. The videos that we link to down below are also useful. They go into more detail and description on many of these concepts. And again, really taking the test should give you a sense of where you stand, and really the next step, if you want an improved score, is to go ahead and download the app. Again, free install, and it'll give you a chance to answer a lot of questions and get feedback for each of your questions. The app will customize to you. I think it's really useful, and again, would recommend checking it out. All right, thanks, guys.